Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Fourth Quarter Sports Podcast. Obviously, I've taken a little bit of a break in planning out the future. I'm back to host Edward DeMaria, and I'm here to keep going down this path, saddle up, and grind it out for these next 2 months. As to everyone that showed their support for this podcast over my sort of long break in its downtime, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It was one of the main things that pushed me to come back and keep doing this. But enough of all that. You're here for the sports, not to hear about what I've been going through. So, as many of you know, the NFL regular season wrapped up on Sunday, and the playoff breakout has been set. So let's take a look back at some of those teams that weren't able to make it, and also who I think is going to be able to go all the way this year. So we're going to start the NFC and start at the bottom, and we're going to work our way up. So starting with the Falcons, their offense was explosive. It looked great. Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones, Matt Ryan, Todd Gurley, and Russell Gage even at the end were all clicking. But the defense was really unable to stop opponents when it needed it, when the offense needed them to, as well as the team. Younghoe Koo was spectacular, -1 pretty major slip up in Week 16 against the Chiefs. But besides from that, he's looked great. Everyone hates Doug Peterson now when it comes to the Eagles. In Week 17, he benched Jalen Hurts and got a lot of slander for it, for not playing a full 60 minutes or not playing to win. Lost a lot of respect in the team as well as from the fan base. And they basically handed the football team a free win in a home playoff game. In a game that was close. It was not a blowout. This was a decently close game. The Lions and the Panthers, they were both really to hanging games due to strong offenses, but they kind of struggled and backed into the blowout corner. When they started getting down by a lot, they were really unable to grind back and get through there. So crucial stops by defense and lack of, offense down big was able to sort of stifle them. The Cowboys and the 49ers were in the same boat. Injuries absolutely derailed their season. But kind of for the Cowboys, Dak Prescott threw them completely off track. Andy Dalton came in and was good, not great, as you'd expect Andy Dalton to be. But Ezekiel Elliott looked horrendous. Nothing like what we've seen in the past from Zeke. Tony Pollard did look good in his replacement. But, at least they drafted a wide receiver, because the Cowboys' defense was terrible. I don't know what they were thinking with CeeDee Lamb. He's a great player. He had a great rookie season, but really, as for those 49ers, it was absolutely amazing for what they were able to do with their injury. As for the Cowboys, they kind of just leaned back and accepted the fact, not our year. We're giving it up. The 49ers kept fighting. A lot of their injuries came on defense, a little bit on the offense. But Robert Saleh solidified himself as a future head coach, and I do think he'll be a head coach somewhere next year, by bringing back that defense, and it looked phenomenal, even without most of their pass rushers and D linemen playing with practice squad guys in the secondary. They still looked great. They were able to stifle the Rams and the Seahawks, both powerhouses in their division, as well as the Cardinals towards the end of the year. The Giants were on the receiving end of that Doug Peterson derailing. But it's not all downhill for the Giants. Daniel Jones, I expect to have a big third year. It's kind of in the way that, Mahomes did, taking his team to the Super Bowl. Obviously not of that level. That's a bit of an odd analogy, but not of that level, but something great like that. And because their defense looked great. It was very solid against the run, but it was amazing against the pass. James Bradbury, Jabril Peppers, all those guys had great years. Listen, the Vikings were not going to make the playoffs. No matter what anyone told you, They were sitting at 7-6 at one point. They were not making the playoffs, even at that point. Even when they were in contention, so many things needed to happen in that division and outside of it that were just not going to happen. But the future's in Taylor for them. Dalvin Cook looked great. Justin Jefferson looked great. Rookie of the Year candidate. Second in voting no matter what. Draft Trask or Jones. Kyle Trask, Mac Jones, either of those guys. Obviously, neither of them won the Heisman, because this year the Heisman was not a quarterback's award, unlike the MVP, and pose a threat to the Bears and the Packers, who have been running that division. And I genuinely almost missed the Cardinals when going through ESPN's list, because I just looked at the rankings for the conference and started at the bottom and went up writing these. And the Cardinals are actually in between two playoff teams, the football team and the Bears, but they did not make the playoffs because the football team's only in because they won their division. Obviously third in the NFC West, seventh in the NFC. If Twitter was not gushing over Kyler Murray and the Hail Murray, I really think that they'd see this team as not as good as people think. The defense has way too many holes, and the offense has been inconsistent, especially with the run game outside of Kyler Murray. Christian Kirk and DeAndre Hopkins are obviously phenomenal targets, but losing a guy like Larry Fitzgerald to Canton possibly in the next, if not this year, the next, is going to harm them. The pass rush has looked great with Hassan Reddick and Chandler Jones, and Patrick Peterson's been Patrick Peterson, and Budda Baker's emerged as a young star, but there's still just so many holes on that defense, because where it's great, but where it's not, it's not. As for the AFC, it's a little bit like that too. There's not too much in the middle, like, oh, he's good, we can put him there and he'll do a good job. If you're either good or you're bad in the AFC. The Jaguars need to draft Trevor Lawrence and hire a decent head coach so they'll be able to take care and build an offense around Trevor Lawrence's unique play style. And that's it. They had a decent defense this year, a little shaky when they needed it to, but it was actually able to get the job done. It was the offense that lacked. Unfortunately, Gardner Minshew is just not the guy. He might be in an alternate universe where the Jets don't beat the Rams and the Browns, but I think that Trevor is just infinitely better than Minshew will ever be. And New York kind of needs to either buy in on Fields and will hire a head coach and hire a head coach that is going to say, we don't like Sam Darnold, we're going to get a new guy and build an offense around him and take Fields or Wilson with the second overall pick. Perfectly acceptable. Or if you get a new head coach and he's like, Darnold's good, Gase wasn't able to maximize his talents, we like him, Penei Sewell, phenomenal pick. One of the best offensive lineman prospects ever. He'll be a phenomenal number 2 pick if you want to go with him there. Stick with Sam Darnold or draft someone later on. Either would be perfectly acceptable and you would get no flack for either. Just make sure you hire the right head coach, because the Jets are in kind of the same situation as the Jaguars. Head coach, young quarterback, set. But the Jets are in a better position because they have a good defense. It's a little shaky, but I believe it's good. And they have great targets for him to throw to. And a very solid offensive line, starting with guys like Kelechi Osemele and Mekhi Becton. So that's why if you want to draft Penei Sewell, I hope I'm saying that right, it would solidify that offensive line. But I think that those are your two paths, your split paths, and you got to just choose one and dial in on it. The Texans, get Deshaun Watson some help. The man is dying over there. Literally. I wish I was kidding, but he's got no help from anyone on that team. Even his own coaches aren't helping him at this point. You had a rough year. It was bad. You went from a playoff team, number 1 in the AFC South, to second to last in the AFC South. And you probably would have been last if it weren't for the Jaguars. But, it's okay. New general manager, new head coach, hit the reset button, top 3 pick, and make the right choice. That's right! You traded it to the Jaguars. Not the Jaguars. I was just talking about. You traded it to the Dolphins. For what? Laramie Tunsil, who's been great, but Deshaun Watson's still getting heated off of every other part of the line. You could have not predicted that Penei Sewell would become what he is. But this would have been such a much better investment for you to get a younger, honestly, possibly better guy than Tunsil is, and you would be paying him less money, and it would help Deshaun Watson better. You don't have a second-round pick either, because guess what? The Dolphins own that too. At least you got Kenny Stills. So please use whatever picks you have left. It's probably a 3rd, a 5th, a 6th, and a 7th at this point, because you probably gave the 4th to the Cardinals or something. use him to help Deshaun Watson. Get him a defense. Get him some offensive line. I know it's a lot, but anyone will help at this point. And the Bengals are there too. They need to get Burrow some offensive line help. Even though the backup offensive line looked better than the starting offensive line, it was a bit of an oddity. And a defense and a decent interior lineman or linebacker would help the defense numbers insanely. And then just pray that Joe Burrow comes back the same way Deshaun Watson did, looking like his old self, better. Torn ACL the middle of your rookie season. You got to hope you're in the same boat. If he comes back not looking like what he was this year, you're going to be in a rough spot. They have a high pick as well, so they'll be able to put that to good use. As for the Broncos, you've got a new general manager on the way. John Elway was promoted to head of football operations. Do not mess this up simply. Get Von Miller back in his groove. Hope Bradley Chubb keeps his progression up, and pray that Drew Lock takes that big third-year step the same way that Mahomes did, and the same way I think Daniel Jones will. Pray that happens, and you should be good. The Chargers as well. Rookie of the year at quarterback. Not a doubt in my mind. Herbert's going to win it. Replaces Rivers. Does a great job. And hope the defense picks it up. They come back healthy, and they should do a phenomenal job. And the defense is great. Maybe boost the secondary with another defensive back, and you'll be able to compete in the AFC West next year. And as for the Patriots, Cam Newton is not the answer. You need to draft a quarterback. Get whoever the Vikings, Jets, Falcons, Jaguars, and honestly, God, the Dolphins, maybe, give you. Grab them. Whether it's Trask, Jones, probably not Lance, any of those guys. Ellinger maybe might be there. But if you don't want to do that and you want to go a different route and you want to grab some random defensive guy that'll turn into a stud, go ahead. I wouldn't blame you. So that's what I would do unless you want to reunite Belichick with Garoppolo or trade for Stafford or gamble on Wentz. You have to hone in on a young quarterback and make that choice now. As for the Raiders, I thought that they were going to be a playoff team in the first half of the season, but the defense fell apart in shambles. As quick as they were in the playoff conversation, they were out of it. All they needed to do was not blow their big games this year, and they would have been perfectly fine. And yet somehow they just fumbled the entire second half of the season. Big losses to the Dolphins that kind of knocked them out of playoff contention at the end of the year. And speaking of the Dolphins fans, you have nothing to fear. Tua time has been pushed back a couple of months, but the clock is still ticking. The Dolphins did unfortunately miss the playoffs. They got blown out in Buffalo by the Bills. Matt Barkley, and honestly, they kind of just lost to Gabriel Davis, who had a phenomenal game, like 150 total yards and 3 touchdowns. And Fitzpatrick wasn't able to come in, and I think Tua got what most rookies experience as their welcome to the NFL moment. You know, the moment where it kind of just hammers them hard, and they're like, okay, and they kind of break down a little bit under pressure. That's fine. Everybody has one. But they'll be fine. They were nearly a playoff team, the first team out of the playoffs in either conference, any division, and a top 3 pick, and another in the middle of the first, I think at 18, as well as a ton of other future first and second rounders that you have to use to help Tua's progression. But I've still seen the argument that a part of me says there's no way they should ever do this, but every time I hear it, it starts like, well, not a terrible option every time you look at it, and that's taking a quarterback at 3 if the Jets take Sewell. If the Jets go Fields or Wilson, you have to take Penei Sewell. He's the best offensive lineman prospect, one of the best we've seen. If they take him, I would not call the Dolphins crazy for taking another quarterback. If you do stick with Tua, you cannot let him flop like other Alabama quarterbacks. Build around him, don't build for him. And that's the last of the non-playoff teams. So as for the teams that were able to kind of, grab that lucrative playoff spot, we're going to push them to the side real quick. We're going to talk about the 2 teams that were able to make the playoffs, or that were able to make the playoffs in fashion and locked up the only bye that a team will get, and that's the number 1 seed. So obviously the Packers in the NFC are a train running at high speeds on pure spite and hatred alone from Aaron Rodgers. He is resonating an energy strong enough to take down juggernauts. The Packers moved up in the first round to draft a backup quarterback and gave Rodgers no help on offense after he expressed the fact that he would have loved them to grab someone. And how does he respond? By leaving the team, not playing? No. He goes out there and puts up an MVP season. He's my MVP for the year. I'll make those picks later. But getting into the postseason, once they do actually have to play, the Smith brothers on the edge, Preston and Za'Darius, need to have a phenomenal big postseason to pull this one out. The defense really needs to step it up. Jair Alexander, Clinton Dix back there, Adrian Amos, just need to have great games this entire postseason on a 3-game run. Should be able to pull it out to the Super Bowl. As for the Chiefs from the AFC, they're a confusing team. So one game, come out guns a-blazing, shredding defenses, making it look like the JV and varsity high school teams are scrimmaging. And it's a spectacular offense led by Mahomes and company. But then they go out and they drop 17 points on the Falcons defense. The terrible Falcons defense. And they only won that game because Younghoe Koo missed a field goal at the end of it. Would they have won in overtime? Probably. I would have picked them to win in overtime, even if the Falcons got the ball first. But still, that's a loss that could have tarnished their record. They don't miss that. If this offense clicks, they're going all the way. But there is really only one AFC team that has the ability to punish their lacking defense, hold the ball for a very long time through a dominant running game, and stifle their potent offense with an attack that doesn't let them play to their strengths and sort of make them run a different game plan. So starting with what's now called Super Wildcards weekend, as there's now 3 games per day. On Saturday, the Bills are hosting the Colts in a game that the Colts I only really see winning through dominant defense and Josh Allen coming down with Lamar Jackson syndrome. If Josh Allen turns out to be like Lamar Jackson, can't win playoff games, the Bills have a little bit of a problem on their hand. Because you'd be in the exact same spot. Allen comes out strong first year being the one calling the shots, takes him to playoff as a wild card team, takes him to playoffs, and suffers a loss that they tried to come back at the end and were unable to make it. If they get blown out by the Colts or even lose, I would not want to go on Twitter. But I think the Bills are going to win. The offense just has to click. Josh Allen gets going early, Stephon Diggs, and they just got to punish him through the end. Don't give them any room to breathe. Next up, the Rams are driving up to Seattle to play the Seahawks in the Legion of Room. As Brett Coleman called it, I believe. The Legion of Room, yes. Now, one of the worst defenses in the NFL that I've seen. It's terrible. I don't know why Jamal Adams called it good. It's probably because of their run defense when they played some terrible running teams this year. But the Rams defense, on the other hand, is outstanding. Experience up front and youth in the secondary. And that secondary is led by none other than Jalen Ramsey, the only defensive back that's been able to stop DK Metcalf this year. And I think he'll do it again. This is the only playoff game that I'm going to say comes down to whether or not one guy plays. If Jared Goff plays, Rams. If he doesn't, Seahawks. That's just how it works. That's what I think. And finally, Tom Brady's Buccaneers are scooting on up to D.C. It's really Maryland, but D.C. to play the only man that God fears so much that he refuses to take him, Alex Smith. Alex Smith was literally told that he would not live, and he's back leading a team to the playoffs. Give him the award. Don't just give it to him. Give it to him. Name it after him. Unfortunately, Alex Smith's fairy tale will have to come to an end as the football team has to face the Bucs' loaded and stacked offense consisting of Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, Cameron Brate, Rob Gronkowski, and Tom Brady throwing the football. With that happening, there is absolutely no possible way that I can tell you right now who's going to win this game. Because on one hand, you have this insane Bucs offense and a shockingly underwhelmed defense from the football team. A great front seven and a overlooked secondary. It's not great, but it's overlooked. And the only way that I can see the football team winning is if their offense is able to punish a, mid-talent Bucks defense. You get Terry McLaurin, Logan Thomas, and Antonio Gibson going on the Bucks secondary. I obviously can't say that a team is just going to blow out the other team 100%. They're going to win, because if they do somehow lose, then it affects me a little bit. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at this team being able to win. Going into Sunday, an absolute thriller. Divisional round match from last year, but this time the Ravens are going into Tennessee. When I look at this game, I completely forget the mid-year loss. The mid-year overtime loss in Baltimore, I don't even look at that when I'm looking at this game. What I'm looking at is a red-hot Lamar Jackson and the number one rushing offense in the league, boasting over 3,000 total yards, led by Jackson, the best dual-threat quarterback in the NFL and possibly we'll ever see, as well as a thunder and lightning duo that gives USC's 2008 backfield a run for its money in J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. The only problem is the Ravens meet the season's NFL rushing leader, 2,000-yard rusher Derrick Henry. And when these teams met last year in the divisional, Derrick Henry went to town. He ran all over this Ravens defense. But the defense souped up. They got better, they got bigger on the inside, and they got stronger on the outside. And they held Henry to very short 2-3-yard gains for most of the game. And he didn't crack 100 yards until a big home run ball at the end of the game that sent the Ravens home in overtime on a 40-yard rush, on a 45-yard running touchdown that ended it for them in overtime, putting him over 100 on the game. As for the Titans offense, the rest of it, A.J. Brown, great. Jonnu Smith, great. Corey Davis, great. It's hard to find a weakness when you also have Ryan Tannehill throwing the football. He's been dicing up defenses all season off of play action, drawing linebackers in, throwing it over the top to his big wide receivers that can catch the ball. And Derrick Henry was doing a thing on the ground. If the Ravens can't contain Derrick Henry, it's over. The Ravens will not be able to win this game if they let Derrick Henry go for 200-plus yards and multiple touchdowns. But if this Ravens defense, which has stepped up and outperformed some not-so-great teams recently, with that confidence booster, and they hold the Titans to just over 100 rushing yards, which isn't great, but it's about where they're averaging this year, and you give Lamar Jackson the ball back a couple of times, and you give him this opportunity to gash and tear this awful Titans defensive unit, you have a chance. And that's their shot. Get Lamar Jackson the ball. Get J.K. Dobbins the ball. Let him run the ball, burn clock, and let them torch this defense. As for the Bears and the Saints, they're up next with the middle game. And I don't want to overthink this, but I'm going to. If Trubisky plays great, the defense plays great, and Drew Brees forces the ball downfield and is unable to get things going, the Bears can win it. But I think the Saints take this one handily. But we've seen crazier. And as for the final game, we see the Steelers. The final game pits the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Browns for the third time this year. They split the regular season series, but only because the Steelers rested a lot of their starters and the Browns were going all out to try and secure up this playoff spot. And they won by 2, so good for the Browns. But the winner of this game is not winning another game this postseason. Neither of them have really shown that they can pull out games against the other good strong AFC teams. The Steelers really only have 3 quality wins this year and ugly losses to teams that they should have beaten handily. As for the Browns, they're kind of new to this whole more than 17 weeks of football thing. And I don't really know how far they'd be able to go against elite AFC teams. And that's kind of what concerns me with them. As for my picks for each game, the Bills are going to take the Colts. Rams, Seahawks, Goff's there. Rams, Goff's not. Seahawks. Bucks handle the football team. Ravens over the Titans, hometown pick right there. The Saints beat the Bears, and the Steelers beat the Browns. But the NFL isn't the only football league happening right now, as the college football playoffs just concluded with the Crimson Tide absorbing the soul and rolling over the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, exploiting a Notre Dame defensive unit that was great and boasted future first-round pick Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. But this is the worst performance I've seen out of the Irish since the 1600s and a potato famine. But the real shocker came later on, when future Jacksonville Jaguar Trevor Lawrence did all that he could to make Justin Fields look like the better pick at number 1 overall. Fields racked up 6 total touchdowns and an interception while playing most of the game with what appears to be a non-serious injury but looked bad at the time. He got drilled with a helmet straight in his side rib area. That happened midway through the second. Fields made his case to New York, maybe Miami. That's still a little sketchy. And possibly an Urban Meyer-headed Jaguars team. But I still think Trevor goes number 1 overall. And really whatever happens, the NFL draft will be hectic with those first 3 picks. So I will definitely keep a close watch on that situation. But as for this week's episode, that's all I've got for you. It's going to be a hectic couple of weeks here with the playoffs and the scouting and everything. So I will definitely make sure to be jotting down more notes and writing more in-depth and sort of, dedicated and detailed scripts. But happy Wednesday to everyone. Stay safe. And I am your host, Edward DeMaria of the Fourth Quarter Sports Podcast. I will see you next week. Adios.